You're listening to RevOps FM with Justin Norris. Welcome to RevOps FM, everyone. Today we chat with Sam Kuehnle, VP of Marketing at Loxo. Sam's one of a handful of people who I think is really rewriting the playbook for B2B marketing today. I've followed him on LinkedIn for a few years now, ever since he was VP of Demand Gen at Refine Labs, and where Sam was really an important part of that movement, evangelizing a switch from traditional lead gen approaches in favor of a demand gen or demand creation strategy, which is something I've really come to believe in as well. But one thing I've always been super curious about is what does it look like for a company to fully embrace those strategies from the top down and really design their whole marketing approach around them. It's one thing to evangelize a method as a consultant where you have a certain professional distance from the company and authority that you bring as an external expert. It can be quite another to lead that transformation from within a company where you need to get fellow executives on board, figure out communication, navigate all the challenges and complexity that come with any significant strategic change like that. So Sam has been taking that journey for the past year or so, and today we're going to dive into his career as a marketer, his time at Refine, and really go deep into some of the super innovative work he is doing today at Loxo. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate that intro.
I don't always start it at the beginning with everyone, but I think in your case, it is kind of relevant. I'm curious, what was your experience like as a marketer before Refine Labs?
What was my experience like before that? Worked at a big publicly traded company. I was very low on the totem pole, so my point of view on marketing was whatever I was told my point of view on marketing was supposed to be. It was a great experience overall. It was like I got to learn how big companies work, how marketing works, and this formulated a little bit of how you understand and learn things as time goes on. So I say there's 3 stages to it. Your first stage is you ask questions and you get answers. The second stage is you're a little bit more knowledgeable. You give answers to the questions that people are asking. Then the third stage is you start to question those answers that have been given time and time again. And so where that stemmed from was when I was at that organization for 8 years and everything, I got to experience it all. It was like, I don't know anything about marketing, but let's go learn it. Then I got to start to do marketing. People would come to me like, hey, what's the best way to get some new leads? What can we do? And I'd start to share like, here's what I've been told. Here's what I'm going to tell you. But what started to happen was I noticed like things were a little bit different. They were changing with the space and everything. And I started to hear more and more of, good idea, Sam. Now go sit down at the end of the table and just be quiet while the adults talk here. They didn't actually say that. They weren't that rude, but we all experienced that as a kid. So my first few years there, I was learning, I was absorbing all in that. And then as time went on, I got to take on more responsibility, aka like, Sam, you need to start thinking, you need to start making decisions versus just being told what to do. And this is where I really started to see a disconnect between marketing success and then the lack of that translating to the company. So what I mean by that is we would hit our lead goals for the quarter, for the first half of the year, whatever it was. But then we noticed like, why are our company pipeline targets short? Because if we built this perfect funnel, then X number of leads should mean Y amount of pipeline, Z revenue for the company, everyone's good, but something wasn't working. And that's why I started to think more and more like there has to be a better way of what we're doing. And it's not these linear retargeting funnels. Click on ad 1, you're going to be served ad 2. Click on ad 2, you're served ad 3. All of a sudden, this person's ready to be talking to sales and MQL chasing. So that was the beginning of the journey, so to speak, before Refine Labs even entered the picture.
I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's episode, Knack. I love marketing automation software, but let's be honest, the email and landing page builders are usually terrible. You can't make it nice without a developer, and marketers are going to find a way to break things or go off brand. You do not have time for that. So Knack is totally different. You set the guidelines and then give your users a building experience that's slick, modern, and beautiful. When they're done, everything goes to your map at the push of a button. And don't worry, it supports global teams, approval workflows. It's got your integrations. So head on over to revops.fm/knack. That's KNAK, and get a special offer just for my listeners. And it sounds like you alluded to this to some degree, but at that company where you had a fairly significant tenure, were they just using the kind of traditional lead gen, what MQL hamster wheel, quote unquote, approach?
Yeah, it was best practice playbook. At the time, it was like the serious decisions, waterfall, all of that. The company was following exactly what the board wanted to do, leadership wanted to do. It was if I was in that position, I was in leadership, I probably would have been saying, this is what we should be running for the best results. Like no one really knew there was a better way at the time.
To recap that, for those that may not know, You collect leads, score them, surface them to some sort of sales team, and then chase them down. And probably too much to ask, but like, what were the conversion rates like at that time, like lead to opportunity?
I was so far removed from that and underpaid to even care about those. My job is literally just get as many leads as possible. I can tell you our cost per leads, I was getting $40 cost per leads. Click to conversion rate was what I was emphasizing on because it was all that. But how do you define lead at that point? And for me, it was get someone to sign up for a webinar, get someone to download an ebook. So is it a qualified lead? Is it someone who's just got a little bit of interest? That's where it was all different. But I mean, I can't imagine what the conversion rates were from lead to, I guess then it depends on like, what do you want to convert that to just an opportunity being created, a qualified opportunity. But I could probably tell you it was less than 5% to qualified opportunity from there.
Just pulling on that thread, because it alludes to something interesting. In a large enterprise, there can be like significant gaps between like what you're doing in this part of the assembly line process and what's happening down there. Was that lack of visibility concerning to you as a marketer, or was it from a leadership point of view? Sam, keep your head down, like generate the leads and let sales kind of work it out down there.
Yeah, I think I was so young in my career at that point. I wasn't even thinking about it. It was more, I need to be here at 9. I get to leave at 5. What are we doing this weekend? And it wasn't until later that I really started to enjoy and think more methodically about marketing and its impact to the company, because we were very much siloed. Marketing needs to produce X amount of pipeline. Sales is going to produce Y amount of pipeline. Partner resellers is going to produce Z amount of pipeline. Everyone lived in their own little bubble. And there were so many of us contributing to just that marketing part. I never went higher to look at like, what's this doing for the business impact or anything. It was very much, if I want to keep my job, I need to hit the specific goal that I'm given in my tiny little role.
Make so many widgets and then the widgets disappear.
Yeah. Is that the best way? No, probably not. But I always say the only failures are things you don't learn from. Like looking back on that experience, like I've learned from it and I know what to expect of the team and how to go forward with it. But it was definitely a good career lesson for me.
At some point you made this jump and joined Refine Labs. I think it was only about like a year or so old at that point, the agency. Tell us about that transition. What made you think even about heading in that direction and how you got on board that train?
Honestly, it was pure luck. Right time, right place. That was when I was starting to think beyond what's this disconnect between what I'm doing and the company missing things. I was getting irritated with those a little bit, and I came across one of Chris's early posts on LinkedIn, and I commented on it. I had no LinkedIn presence at that time. I wasn't active on there. He did this amazing thing. He commented back and it continued that dialogue. And to me, I'm just like, oh my God, this is a guy who gets like hundreds of likes on his posts and he replies to me. What world is this? And so I was like, that's interesting. I started to read some more of his posts, got a sense of his philosophy. And that was the aha moment for me where I was like, he's putting into words the things that I was kind of feeling were the disconnect that I was experiencing as a lead gen marketer. And so I saw they were hiring. I put in an application and the rest was history from there.
I remember the first post that Chris wrote, and he was just hammering on marketing attribution. I think it was one of those ones where he said that it's cracking like cheap glass. And I was like, that was my job to implement marketing attribution technology and took a professional pride in what I was doing. But I really did consider it like a sort of emperor has no clothes moment where like somebody had to call out and say, hold on a second, not everything is working the way that we think it is or that everybody says it is. And that's obviously part of the appeal and the power of that message, that I can cut through and be distinctive and be provocative. Was there an onboarding into that mindset and methodology once you joined, or was it sort of like, you're smart people, let's go out and figure things out in practice?
That's a good question. A lot of it was vetted in their unique interview process that I loved and have learned from and taken moving forward. But early on, the first couple stages aren't so much like your traditional, like, tell me about your biggest strength, tell me about your biggest weakness. It was him probing to see, do you understand this new philosophy that we're starting to notice? And more importantly, like, called critical thinking. Are you able to think beyond and just not just get a data point and say this, or like thinking about attribution? Is the right question, how much should we be assigning to this specific touch point? Or should we be understanding what collectively helps us grow as a business and understand those levers so we can raise and lower them specifically? So it was a lot of looking for those types of insights. And like you, like I'd worked to help implement Visible at that organization that I was at before. So I knew all about that and everything was set to what's the exact ROI on this paid search keyword? What's the exact ROI on this Facebook ad or anything else? So it was really interesting to go into that with Chris. And a lot of it then became he had the podcast, are you listening to that? Do you agree with a lot of what he says? And this isn't him trying to say you need to agree with me, but it goes back to that aha moment I was talking about a little bit ago when he started to put into words some of the thoughts that I'd had, but I couldn't quite verbalize in a way. That connected a lot of dots for me to be able to speak to. It's like, okay, I totally get it. Now you can't force people through a funnel. A lot of people are in active contracts. They're not looking to move. You're targeting the wrong person. But what happens if you just get ahead of them? So when they are ready to buy, you're not doing that with ebooks. That's not what they care about. Or if it is, give them the ebook. You don't need to gate it and capture their information. Zoom Info's out there now. You can go get their contact for 3 cents instead of spending $45 for a conversion. So a lot of it was just kind of seeing and reconciling how do we buy today and taking it from a common sense approach. And then just saying, if I was the end user, what would I want my experience to look like if I were being marketed to buy that product or to buy that service?
What would a typical engagement be like for you? Was it coming in very holistically, understanding the customer, the ICP, and then like building something, or did people bring you in more tactically to solve some specific problems, or was there a typical engagement?
It was a mix. So the typical engagement would be, usually we'd have a customer come to us or future customer come to us where there's a couple key champions who recognize like our current way of marketing isn't going to continue to work moving forward. We recognize the future. We either are a startup and we don't have the resources to scale this appropriately in terms of like we can't do the executing. We have the leadership who wants to do it, but they don't have the knowledge and experience of what exactly needs to happen to write that playbook, to equip the team, to build the content engine, to be able to move forward with it. Or we don't know how to sell our leadership team on it. Like we know this is the way, but sometimes you need that third-party validation almost to say it's like, it's not just me who thinks this is a larger movement overall. So one of those 3 scenarios were the most common ones that we would come up against, and that's where we'd then work with them. And I loved our few champions that we'd have, but it was completely unrealistic to ever expect to have a prospect come to us where 10 out of 10 people on that team were fully aligned with what we wanted to do. We usually had to sell them, for lack of a better term, to understand like, what is this approach? Why are we taking it? Why are we recommending it? And you have to get their buy-in with it, because if they are not philosophically aligned with it, 2 months down the line, or shit, even 2 weeks down the line, they're going to say, like, where are the leads? What's this going on? Like, why aren't we hitting these things? And you're going to be back to step 1. And you can't straddle that line because you're going to be splitting your resources. You're not going to be able to go all in on this demand gen strategies, which is more or less like you have to jump in with both feet if you want it to be truly effective. Because if you keep doing the lead gen, then you're going to have half this stuff going over to sales and they're just like, why do I keep getting these crap leads? But then they're not going to be able to recognize, well, what was the ebook download lead versus what's the person who came to the website and said, like, I know what you all do. I have this problem. I want to talk to sales right now. They're not going to know that, and they're not going to follow up. They're not going to trust marketing like they always do. So that's just one example of the disconnect that needs to happen. So working with them to get full alignment from the top down, and then start to say, here's the playbook that we're going to run with you. We're going to help you define your audiences. We're going to help you understand where they spend their time, because while this client might be doing great on LinkedIn, so for example, we market to recruiters. Recruiters have to use LinkedIn all the time. Like, it's a very easy channel for us to leverage, but I've worked with companies that sell to engineers, programmers, developers. They're not on LinkedIn. You've got to go find ways like, how do we get onto GitHub? How do we get onto Reddit and YouTube and those other places where they spend time? So that's where you take this overarching philosophy of how do we get in front of the people we want to educate them, help them, give them value. So when they are ready to buy, they'll come to us. Then we go and help them plug in, okay, here's your audience, here's your message, here's the mediums, here's the content types that you want to use, and help them start to piecemeal that. And then either from there, we'll execute for them, or we'll give them a playbook. They learn it. 9 months later, they're like, we've got it. We're going to build the team in-house and take it from here. So a couple of different choose your own adventures within how all of that worked. But I'd say 95% of our engagements look like that.
And a lot to unpack there, but let me push on the button around communication first. And we've had a few offline chats about this. It's something that's very top of mind for me right now. One of the things I've reflected on is that it's this weird paradox that basic marketing sounds sophisticated to non-marketers, or even some marketers. Like, oh, look, this keyword got us, I use it like $1 million in pipeline. That sounds like very sophisticated, very almost finance level hardness in terms of the data. People like that. They're like, oh, this person's got their act together. Even though it is a gross oversimplification of reality, it doesn't actually make sense in the real world. Whereas if you're like, oh, we're going to pursue this multi-channel demand creation strategy and engage our target audience, and they're going to come to us when they want to buy. to like, imagine delivering that message at an all hands. It feels fluffy to the people on the engineering team, to the people on the finance team listening. They're like, oh, it's just marketers, head in the clouds, thinking they're waving their magic wands, even though that's actually the more realistic and sophisticated approach to marketing. For your clients, how did you come in and try to present that in a way that had the like credibility and hardness to it that you needed to get buy-in?
So a lot of it stems from expectation setting. And so I like to do that in two ways. And this is something that takes time. You're not going to be able to hash all this out in a 30-minute meeting with them. You have to go in a couple different steps. So the first part of the expectation setting is getting them to understand where you're coming from with this new direction. So the first thing I'd like to do is you're in the room, you've got your couple champions in there, and then you have the CEO, the CFO who needs to sign off, the sales team members who are like, great, another marketing agency. And what I like to do with them is I just say right off the bat, would you rather, got two options, hit your lead goal, miss your revenue target, or would you rather miss your lead goal, hit your revenue target? Let them think on that for a second. 99% of business leaders, if they're in a business leader position, they're going to say revenue target. Absolutely. Like that's what keeps the doors open at the end of the day. That's what keeps us alive. So I'm like, okay, good. That's what we're focused on. And for anyone who somehow finds that 1% of people are like, hit the lead target, like run fast. That's a sinking ship. You're just going to want to get out of there. And so the purpose of that is one, to get them to align on what is our focus with this engagement. Is it leads or is it revenue? Okay, cool. We are aligned. We're focused on revenue. The next question I would like to ask is I'd look at the CEO, the CFO, someone, and just say like, tell me about the last purchase that you helped to make within the organization. How'd you go about it? What did the experience look like? Tell me about the whole journey. I really want you to think about it and be detailed. So I'd go through it, give them a second. They'd say, well, I had a peer who told me about it. And then one day I was on LinkedIn, I saw a post from their CEO, or, a team member shared the CEO's post in our Slack, listened to a podcast with this other company that I admire, recommended this product or said that they use it. I saw an ad on LinkedIn one day. I clicked on a Google ad when I searched for like best software in X category. And the intent here is you're going to see those last couple examples are very much trackable, traditional marketing efforts. But the first three, those are not trackable by any means. And those usually carry a lot more weight because if you don't know that company, you're less likely to click on that ad in the first place. But if you have a peer saying like, go check them out, you hear someone on a podcast and you get to understand the CEO's point of view of the software that you want to buy, and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. I'm aligned to it. Those all influence the fact that you'll probably be much more likely to engage with some of those other ads or items later on. And so all this to say is you have to do all of this in aggregate. We're creating an ecosystem here. There's no linear path to purchase. There's so much untrackable things that we need to do. And this even goes back to a Bain study that very rarely do I say like Bain studies, Forrester reports, any of those. Like there's a lot of stuff in there that I take with a grain of salt, but this one was absolutely spot on, where it was saying 4 out of 5 companies go to market and they already have a short list of vendors in mind for software, for services, something like that. And when they go finally do make that final purchase, 90% of them pick from that day one shortlist. So that tells me everything you need to know right there. How do you get on that day one shortlist? That's your best odds. If you're fighting for that 10%, 1 out of 5, that's what, 5% of things that you can possibly win. That's the smallest slice of pie that you could get. So that's what we're going after, is the long tail of the market. It's going to suck for the first couple quarters because we have to build up this snowball before it can start to really be big and have this momentum behind it. But if we don't do it, what happens to us if we keep doing what we've been doing? And that's where I like to try to say like, okay, let's map out, keep this strategy right now. Let's go do it down 12, 24, 36 months. It's going to get more expensive. The point of diminishing returns is going to come into play. We're going to keep scrapping for this part of the market. If we go this other route, we're going to get ahead of the market. We'll have more people who are aware of us, who want to buy from us. And what happens if our competitors start going that route too? Then that 5% slice of pie just became probably smaller. So there's a lot within there, and that's even before I start to get into the next stage of mapping expectations. But want to stop there, I know that's a huge part of the process that I can quickly tell if they're bought in and understand that first part, if we're going to be successful as time goes on.
That makes a lot of sense. And the example of like bringing it back to your own experience, I think that's really powerful because all of us, to some degree, imagine like prospects as sort of these alien beings that work differently than we ourselves do. And yet when you put yourself in those shoes, you're like, oh, actually, they're just people like me. They are influenced by different things like I am. What would you say your success rate was in terms of delivering that message and having people be like, oh, okay, like Sam knows what he's talking about. Like, did you just have people who are like, sorry, no, this is garbage, I don't believe it?
It usually landed well, 90% of the time. Everyone was in the room, nodding, agreeing. The people who didn't right off the bat were usually those who felt threatened by us. There was another demand marketer who run the old playbook, and that was all that they knew. And we would always come on and say, like, we don't want to replace you. We want to teach you so you can do this. And we can, wipe our hands clean of it in a year or two. You know what to do. You can run it. So that was the immediate ones. Or it was usually later on down the line. We saw this with a lot of VCP-backed companies where the team in the room understands it, but a quarter later, 2 quarters later, you've got the board saying, you signed up for these nominative goals. We're running a predictable revenue model and you guys are short on this. They don't understand the philosophy behind it. So if the CEO and CFO couldn't effectively communicate that to the board, that's where we later got into difficulties where they might want to take a few steps back. We have to do this. We have to please the board. We have to bring in some more leads. Can we split this up? Can we do something different with the budget? And that's where it'd get a little bit tricky sometimes.
I'm curious, when we talk about that mix, and you alluded to it a little bit with like some of the different personas and where they hang out. When I think of demand creation, like my first model for it is what you yourselves did at Refine Labs. You had your thought leader, Chris, as well as yourself and other people like Sydney and folks that I was familiar with on LinkedIn. You had Demand Gen Live, your event that you drove people to mainly from LinkedIn, and then you chopped that up, and then those videos like fed back into LinkedIn. That was like one way of doing it that worked obviously really well, but it doesn't apply to every single business, every single market. How did you go about defining like the demand creation mix, if we can think about it like that way, organic and paid, and what ecosystems are you going to play in? And how did you just go from blank page to figuring out what that should be?
So first thing I'd always say, especially with a lot of startups, is you can't spend your way to product market fit. Demand creation works once you know who your audience is. You're not just your audience, your ICP. Who are your ideal buyers? You have a good message in place that lands with them. Your offer is dialed in. You know, what's the market willing to pay relative to the value that they'll get out from it? Demand creation works really well once those are all set. So this is usually Series B plus. We were trying to figure out our own product market fit early on, and we worked with a couple seed stage companies. And I remember laughing after a call one time when one of the organizations was like, I don't know, sometimes I just look off around my house and think of different use cases that I could use this software for. And I'm like, okay, they have no idea what their use cases, product market fit is yet. And absolutely phenomenal company. I loved working with them. But as you can imagine, our time was limited because they kept adding more spend, but we weren't seeing bottom of the funnel results, because it's like, well, we were trying to spread everything so thin to figure out what message even works. What audience should we be going after? What part of the product is most appealable? So that was one part of it. And then that then feeds into the organic and paid side. So it's distinguished by who your audience is, where they spend their time. So LinkedIn for us worked really well, because where do a lot of marketers spend their time? If they had to go and pick between Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Reddit, Quora, Twitter, you name any of it, a lot of them spend their time on LinkedIn. And we also happened to hit, as I said, I touched on like right time, right place, luck earlier with when I landed at Refine. I think we also hit on right place, right time with where the LinkedIn algorithm was when we got started and how people use the platforms. There weren't a ton of creators yet. You could get crazy organic reach. As soon as you got a couple likes on a post, it would take off with the algorithm, and it would be shown to tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And that was partially due to there weren't a lot of people sharing content on there. So LinkedIn wanted to get anything in front of people that they thought might be relevant. So we were able to take advantage of that. Just, Chris is able to do this. What happens if we have 5 other voices behind him and extend our tentacles even further, so to speak? So that worked well with us, with any organizations that were in the selling MarTech, sales tech, recruiting tech, people that are typically spending a lot of time on LinkedIn. And then we would have other customers that, like I said earlier, they might be a little bit more dev focused, engineer focused. We had like call centers, we had operations type titles. And sometimes what we do is we'd have to figure out the mix of, in the beginning, we'd split it up between, let's see what things look like from a paid standpoint on LinkedIn. Let's see what things look like on YouTube. Let's see what things look like on Facebook, and use that to inform the organic side. And then say, okay, we're noticing that YouTube does best. A lot of people like to watch, to understand, to learn how this works, how they can apply it. So that's what we'd say, let's double down on the organic stuff here. Let's shoot videos. We don't need to do, 9:16. We can do the horizontal because that's native for YouTube. Really get into the how-to, show the product, things like that, versus if we were to say that same audience worked well on Facebook, it'd be a completely different set of recommendations for how to create that organic content there. So We used paid to help define what was the organic strategy was, so to speak. But the other part of it was we usually recommended having an ecosystem, so to speak. Like, don't put all your eggs in one basket. You're going to want to at least have a couple channels, but you should have a primary channel that is, it's kind of like that 80-20 rule. Like, usually one channel is going to do the most of it, but algorithms are going to change. People spend time in different places. So we were always mindful of we've always done something one way. You shouldn't be married to that. You should always be willing to adapt to change. And that was our way of understanding if there ever were changes or opportunities to double down on something that's working really well elsewhere, those would give us the signals to do so.
How would you know early stage if something was working or not? What metrics would you look at there? Because you don't have the lead capture part of it to be able to tell.
Yeah, so we look at some just base metrics on YouTube. Does this have more likes, more views, more comments than our other videos? Like, and start to understand why. Is it the topic? Is it how we're presenting it? Did we do something different within the video itself? Was it shorter? Was it longer? Was it a guest speaker? Getting into some of that to inform it. And then if we did start to go down funnel, Chris kind of made us famous for the how'd you hear about us field that basically we just took from B2C applications and applied to B2B. And so when we were saying earlier, that's not really trackable. Very few times do you have like a direct response off of a YouTube video, like get a demo, click on it. Like, even then it's going to drive over to your site. Usually you're going to lose the UTMs there. And so through that, how'd you hear about us? We start to find out from some of these previously untrackable channels, YouTube, podcasts, Slack communities, others, people are mentioning that in there. And so those are giving us some insights into, okay, we're starting to see YouTube pop up more and more. And what I like about it is that's not like the last touch attribution where they watch that and they're like, I want to buy right now. Usually it's the most memorable or the most helpful touch for them, where they're like, that was kind of the aha moment for them, so to speak. Where they're like, oh, I was watching this YouTube video and then it clicked. Or like, I saw someone say it and that was the final moment where I was like, all right, they're serious contenders on my list. I do want to check them out. Because usually what happens after that is they go and type in Loxo.co and that's going to show up as direct, or they might come through Google as organic. When we both know the full story was something happened before that. And again, we're not doing this to assign credit. We just want to know what are the things that work best to drive the people that we want to do business with over the long term.
There's an approach to doing what you're describing that kind of like a saturation method. Like somebody, I would forget his name or I'd credit him, but he made an interesting post about Monday.com's go-to-market. He was focusing on SEO, but it brought to mind to me, there was like a period of time where you couldn't watch a YouTube video without seeing a Monday ad. They were just everywhere. Wix is doing it right now. For me, at least, maybe for others. And it's like, they must be spending millions and millions of dollars. So it's working, it's getting in front of people, but it's, if the premise of demand creation is actually we're going to be much more efficient, your CAC is going to go down, taking this sort of just like, let's just pump millions of dollars and it gets you in front of people, but it doesn't get you to that efficiency. How did you think about blending efficiency along with getting in front of people, having that awareness, that visibility?
I remember that same Monday streak. I've been using Asana for years. And so this, to me, is, I say, the perfect example of how do you differentiate brand awareness from demand creation. I know Monday.com. They exist, that they are in the project management suite. I'm very happy with my current project management tools. Did it create demand for them? It's hard to know. And I think that sometimes what happens is, if you aren't putting some type of sense of urgency, a sense of like what you're missing out on, or that's where it's hard to know. And there's a big conversation about that right now going on about what's the difference between brand awareness and demand creation. And so that then gets into me for demand creation. It's like you touched on it right there, the efficiency side of it. Because what I look at is the time constrained version of it. Brand awareness is always on. Demand creation is, okay, I'm going to go run a lot of money on YouTube. I'm going to hit every marketer with ads over the course of 2 quarters with Monday.com. Over the following couple quarters, am I seeing an uptick in pipeline, in revenue? And this is where it gets hard. Sometimes you can understand, like if you do have the how'd you hear about us, like you'll hear YouTube more and more, and you can compare that to previous periods and look at the cohorted version of it. Some marketers are going to hate me for this, but sometimes like just basic correlations are going to help you understand if something was or wasn't impacting. And granted, this is going to only come into play if you don't have many variables running at a time. So you know, like this was really the only possible factor, so to speak. And so that's where demand creation to me is, okay, if I'm hitting every marketer with a bunch of money on this channel only, time constrain it. After that time bucket is up, did I see a meaningful impact to it? Because if so, I've created more demand for our company in the sense that it's created pipeline, hand raisers, revenue for us. If it hasn't, and you go do a YouTube survey, have you heard of Monday.com? Yeah, 10 out of 10 people have heard of Monday.com, but it's not driving business for you. So that to me is how I like to differentiate between brand awareness and demand creation.
Does it then come down to the creative? Because I know what you mean. Like, it certainly made me, like, at some point in the future, probably years later, when I needed to look at project management software, like Monday.com was in my list. Like, I guess I should check them out. They seem to be everywhere. So it achieved that much, but it didn't give me that compelling feeling of like, oh, they are the platform to be on, that feeling that you want. And is it because maybe their creative was inadequate, or is it because it's actually the more thought leadership type stuff that gives you that feeling, like that it's hard to do that within the constraints of even a video ad, let alone just a static image ad? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. So it depends on the medium, but the creative itself works. It got your attention. You remember who they are, what they did. I think where they missed out and why companies that are really succeeding well with the demand generation strategy now, I always say they need to have a unique point of view. I don't think Monday.com has a unique point of view on project management. Why what they do is different, how they help people work through tasks better, more efficiently, what differentiates them from Asana, from Trello, from Basecamp. I mean, insert it, they're a commodity and they haven't broken out of that bucket, so to speak. I think the companies that really do this, like you said, they're sharing thought leader content in the sense of how to make more out of your tool, how to get your team more engaged, how to work through things quicker, faster. And that differentiates by, you look at them as not just another tool, but like, oh, they really get this problem and they're going to be invested in my success and making more use of it versus just saying, spend $100 with us, we'll get you as many licenses as you want and we'll just be someone else that you can do. Like, that's how you become just another option. And if I found a company that was able to solve that better, shared that content, I'm going to go to that company every time because they get it.
I think you just nailed it. If they had somehow, I don't know what the message would be, but if they were like, project management is broken, the way that we're doing it does not work, it's very inefficient, and here's this better way, like the Chris Walkerification of that space, that would have been compelling. Maybe just last for Fine Labs, did things evolve during your time there? I know the basic contours of the philosophy probably stayed relatively the same, but were there like new learnings that shifted how you applied your methodology or what that was?
Everything evolved there. We grew massively. So like you said, I joined early days. It was something like employee 11, 12, 13. I was somewhere in there. So I got to experience when things broke, when we hit 1 million revenue, 10 million revenue, 50 employees, 100 employees. Everything was always evolving. And that was my first lesson then, like adaptation, the ability to move as the market moves, as a company does, anything like that's probably the most important thing to long-term success. And so how that applied to like our philosophy and playbook specifically was the platforms, like how I was talking about in the beginning, the LinkedIn algorithm favored what we want to do. Fast forward a couple of years, it definitely changed. I mean, Chris's videos that used to get a couple thousand likes per video are now getting high hundreds, but nowhere near that same initial value. So that was a lesson in and of itself. And that we then translated down to playbooks. So we had playbooks, how to do paid social, how to do paid search. And these were very top level before you even got into the channel. But what we quickly learned was, and I would tell the team this, is if we aren't changing these playbooks at least quarterly, we are falling behind. These platforms are evolving. How people use the platforms are evolving. The mediums that are doing well, the mediums that aren't doing well, all of that is absolutely changing. And our first playbooks, they were in a Google Doc and everyone on the team had common access. And I would say, if I don't have a comment in there at least once a month, we're not doing something right. Because if we're supposed to be at the forefront of how demand generation and marketing works today, and we aren't able to share any insights or pick up anything ourselves, and we're supposed to be some of the top 1% marketers in the world doing this, that says something about us. So in terms of evolution, it's hard to point to specific things. I can talk about the talking head video and how those worked with what Chris did with the podcast. Like that was a big evolution of things. And now go on LinkedIn today and everyone's got that, and it's almost saturated in that they don't work because this almost goes to best practices. What starts as this new cool thing becomes best practice. Everyone's doing best practice, and best practice is no longer actually best practice. It's this weird kind of like inception moment. So that was the other side of it, is how do we see and launch the next best practice? And then by the time that it does become, already beyond to the next thing. And that's what's really hard. You never know what that's going to be, but it comes from a lot of testing and having clients that are open to just saying like, we're going to figure it out. We want to be at the forefront. We know that it's not always going to be what everyone else is doing, but we're okay with that because that's what we want to be doing.
I think it's a difference too between people who can do the hard work to understand root causes and the people that just see a surface effect and mimic it. You know, like the things that work, they work for a reason at a specific time. And if you're just like, oh, I'm going to do that, I'm going to just copy this because that's like the video, all that stuff, fine. You might catch a little bit of that bandwagon effect. But then, like you said, yeah, I've watched that dynamic play out so many times. You can really see it on LinkedIn. It's such a, especially in marketing circles, it's such a closed little weird madhouse sometimes. But if you're just always mimicking, you're never going to be able to figure out what the next, I mean, you may strike gold accidentally, but more often than not, it's like really understanding how people respond to things. It's hard work.
And doing it in a way that stands out. Because like we said earlier with Monday, like how are you differentiating with it? That's a huge part of if you want to be viewed as the thought leader, as the forefront person, and not just a commodity in a big saturated category. That's another part that you have to do, is be seen as an innovator.
So at a certain point, your journey with Refine came to an end and you jumped out there and started to steer the ship at Loxo as the marketing leader. Maybe just start with like, how did you know that it was the right time for you to do that? What drove you to take that step?
Couple of things. One was purely personal. We've got a 11-month-old. And so when we were getting serious about like, we want to start a family, I know my working style, my work ethic. And when you're at an agency and you've got clients in the West Coast and in Europe and you're sitting in the middle, I don't control my time. Let's be honest. I'm at the mercy of them. So I really wanted to be able to own a little bit of that because I wanted to be present with the family and like control my calendar a little bit more to be able to be on top of that. So that was a big part. And then the other part of it was I started as a director of demand gen. I worked with something like 5 to 10 clients that I personally owned, managed everything from start to beginning. And then when I became a VP, I oversaw 20 clients at a different time. And my director of demand gen once told me the difference between working here and working in-house is it's like having a kid. You can tell them what they're about to do is skin their knees, but sometimes they have to skin their knee to learn the lesson. So there's only so many times where I could say, I really strongly recommend you do this. You don't do this. And then watch them go do the opposite. And I was like, if I could do this myself, I could kill it. And I also want to validate for myself. Like if I do go own this all the way, like I can tell everyone what we're doing, what we want to do, why we want to do it. And I had the time to implement it. Would it work? And so that was the other part, was like a personal challenge to myself was, can I walk the walk after talking the talk for a couple of years here? So it was those two things, which I absolutely would not be in the position I am now had I not had the years of learning at Refine Labs to do that. So that set me up for where I am today.
Yeah, and it was that curiosity about would it work to take someone who's the expert in that and then, all right, here you go. Now you own this in-house. Go make it work. What was your first, second, and third thing that you did?
It was pretty close to a blank page. So one, it was just straight up foundational work, operations, processes. Like we had Salesforce. We didn't have a marketing operations platform. We had a customer success platform and everything. I needed to get them all talking to one another so I could understand like who are our customers, what's going on with deals, are they even being tagged properly? So I understand like when they were created, what's our conversion rate? Like every company, we had data hygiene issues when I started. And so I then implemented processes for like, hey, these opportunities, the close dates are 180 days ago. Are you still working it? No, this market is closed, lost. It's okay. We're not going to ding you for your loss rate or anything there, but we just need to have an accurate sense of what's our real pipeline and everything else. So process operational stuff early on, that was a big part of it. And then probably the next couple of things, just learning the market. My background is not recruiting. I have not worked for a recruiting company or as a recruiter. So really just understanding the nuance of it. And like any industry segment you get into, you'll quickly learn like what seems simple in your head when you get started is actually a lot more complex. So taking the time to understand who they are, the different segments, what their use cases are, how they speak, because how an in-house recruiter speaks is very differently from how an agency headhunter recruiter speaks. And being able to speak their language is also how you get their trust, their credibility when you do start to go to market. And then the third one was mapping and building the content engine. I'm not saying scaling it, I'm just saying building, because we need to educate the market if we want to be a thought leader. We had nothing at the time. Like I could create ads and that was about the limit, so to speak. But I wanted to get, what we did was we built a podcast. And I told our CEO, I'm like, I'm not doing this podcast to get thousands of listeners per episode. Like that's not going to happen. What this podcast is going to do is give us the engine for all of the content that we'll produce. So we need the long form in order to create the short form. Basically, we need that long content episode so we can have 5 micro videos that we can use on our website and sales decks and social. So it can create a couple blog posts that we can use and write up. So we can use it to fuel, like we can have customers on and use those as case studies, customer testimonials. But we need that hub in order to create everything else out of. So it was mapping out all of that. So that was my first 6 months was focused on all of those before we even got into that scale from there.
And did you need to layer on any demand capture channels in the beginning, like your SEM or your directories or whatever else, just to like get that lead flow going? Or did you have some space to just build this?
We had a core demand generation program already running. We were running on LinkedIn. We were running a little bit on Facebook, and we did have Google Ads running at the time. Right at the end of the 6 months, we started experimenting with Google Ads and demand capture. And I want to caveat this with like, this is far from market standard, market best practice. Like do your own research, find out for yourself. But we have a low ACV. And so what I was finding after I ran the math on very specific keywords and not just looking at paid search as a whole, but breaking up branded, unbranded, keyword level, everything else, was that we were upside down on almost all of it in terms of our CAC payback period. So I always look at if my CAC payback period is more than 12 months, that's not talking about like total headcount, like marketing all up. So at the ad level, if I'm not recouping a year one spend and people can only sign a 1-year contract if they like, that's not a good look for me, especially if we're bootstrapped and I need to be a steward of our funds. And so I looked at all this and I'm like, that doesn't make sense. And then we've got LinkedIn over here that is just driving 80% of our hand raisers. It's killing it for us. It's not direct response, so I couldn't tell you the specific payback period on it, but I know that we're far from the point of diminishing returns. In terms of our audience that we can reach there, the effectiveness of the ads is like, it doesn't make sense to do Google just because of demand capture, because every company, like it's best practice, right? So I ran the numbers. I did like micro test. What if we pause it for a week, for a month, different like campaign types. And in the end, we just said like, let's pull it. And so demand conversion, we stopped having that program and focused solely on demand creation, in the sense like our sales team, we were winning deals really well at crazy rates. So we knew if we just got them in the funnel, we didn't need to worry about any of those like last touch type activities.
You took off the net. You're up on the tightrope without a net, so to speak. The net being the traditional demand capture channels that just bring a sense of comfort, I think, to any demand marketer. Like, all right, I can bid on keywords. I can bring leads in. It's controllable. I can dial it up and down. For the LinkedIn work that you were doing, you mentioned it's not direct response. So I'm assuming it wasn't like the lead gen form type stuff. It was more static image ads, that sort of thing.
Yeah, static image ads and then video ads. So when I first got here, one of the first things I noticed in the first 30 days after listening to calls, talking to customers, was as soon as they saw the product, they got it. That it was just like, oh, this is way better than our current way. And that was our biggest problem, was we were never on that day one list. People didn't know who Loxo was. There were so many incumbents. And we were creating this new category, talent intelligence platform, that overlaps with a lot of traditional categories, applicant tracking systems, software, contact or sourcing software, contact information finding tools. And so we had to help them see there is a much better way. There's a much more efficient way. So we did a lot of video ads that show different like standard use cases of what they do and how easy that does to execute as the end user. So they don't have to get a demo to do it, because why are they going to sign up for a demo from yet another product when they're happy with what they are? Change management is the hardest thing that we have to overcome. And so proactively getting ahead of all of that by just letting them see it and show up in the feed. And why LinkedIn works so well for us is because with the demand generation strategy and knowing exactly who we want to target, we're not going super broad with who we're getting in front of. We're not taking the Monday.com approach of hitting every recruiter in the world. We have a very defined subset of who we want to be showing to. And for us, to steal Chris's words, it's guaranteed impressions for the people that we want to be seeing our content. That's what the paid ads are doing for us at that point. So using the videos, using static ads, and using it in terms of like messaging of around like there's a better way, or speaking to some of those pains, not just like another application tracking system with some stock picture of a laptop with the software picture on it, but speaking to things that they care about, speaking to pains, and doing it in a different way where it's not, I always use this joke, but it's like, it's not a blue background with white text talking about ROI, but it's creative that catches your eye. It's a message that pokes a little bit fun and a self-deprecating way towards what recruiters do and everything. So like one of them was like, stop recruiting like it's the 1980s. And then we did like, you remember the Now album, like Now That's What I Call Music? So we did a Now That's What I Call Talent, and we grabbed like 18 songs from the 1980s and rewrote the name so they'd be kind of fun related to recruiting or anything. So like instead of Roxanne, we did Loxanne. And we created t-shirts with it. We used those as ads as if it was like the album, and we created like fake infomercials and everything from it. So again, we're in a very commoditized place, but taking it from a creative angle, a different way that stands out and then gets people interested in knowing us, that's a little bit of the brand awareness. But then we did have other plays in place, other messages that weren't just those. So people understood what it was that we were solving for. When we'd say, make 3 times more hires than you currently do, save 20% of your workday, those things, that's where they can understand, okay, Loxo and this. Okay, that's interesting. Now you have my attention. So that was the approach that we take on LinkedIn.
2 things you do there that I really love. I like bringing the product moments out and exposing them rather than hiding them away. Too few people do that. But I think like Notion, I think is really good at this. Their brand LinkedIn page, like they have these animated GIFs or little videos or whatever, but it's always like showing like, here's how you do it. And I don't really use Notion, but I have a favorable impression of them for that reason. So I'm like, oh, it just feels cool. I can see how it would work. It's that better way. And then the creative aspect, which let's face it, not all B2B marketers, we don't have the best track record, let's say, as a discipline when it comes to creating good creative that's unique and original. And then this kind of brings us to some of the work you're doing on connected TV. And I've seen some of that video ads. And these are like TV quality ads, both in terms of production value and just they feel like the sort of ad I would expect from a B2C or like a CPG company, which is a lot of fun. So I'm curious, like you're obviously making a bet here. Let's walk through the thought process and how you got that creative in place and all of that.
Yeah, so that was definitely the intention. And this was the one plus side of Google Ads not being the best bet for us and knowing brand awareness, people knowing about us, getting on that first list is the biggest problem we're struggling with. So, okay, to your root cause analysis, what's our biggest problem that we're trying to solve for? And what's another way that we can approach that? Well, it's not demand capture, it's demand creation. Okay, so let's keep pulling on that demand creation thread. We're on LinkedIn, we're on some other places. But if we know, after looking at the data, we have incredible win rates when people get into the sales cycle. And our biggest challenges are we're not on that day one first list. We're in a very saturated space. People don't know about us. How do we stand out? Simple as that. And how do we also compete against incumbents who have been in the space for decades, who have multi-million-dollar marketing budgets? To me, it came down to 2 things. One, let's differentiate. Let's do what no one else in this space does. And then let's play on a little bit of like, call it the psychological element of it. You see a company on TV, they must be big. How do I not know about them? Am I behind? What's going on? And so there was that element to it also where it's just like, let's make us appear bigger than we are. Granted, we will absolutely be that big and we meet the expectations there, but we almost have to like push that message forward that, hey, we're not just like some random startup out here. We've got our act together. We've got a phenomenal product. Like it is going to take over this space in a matter of years. We're just starting to escalate that a little bit. So yeah, the CTV project was a lot of fun to work through, to be creative, but it was, talk about removing the net from underneath yourself. It was a sizable investment that we had to make sure that we were going to get some return on or make sure it panned out well.
And just to talk through one of your ads that I saw, if you don't mind, but it was, all right, it's a couple, they're in the forest, and the guy of the couple is like looking for Bigfoot, and in the background, there's like a Bigfoot running around. And the wife says something like, you don't need to hunt for Bigfoot, you can use Loxo. And so just this clever hook, this clever concept. It's funny. It's relatable. Again, it's just like the ads you see on TV. Did you come up with that? Someone on your team? Did you hire an agency? How did you get to that place? Because I think that's hard to come up with those concepts, let alone sell them internally in a B2B context.
Yeah, it was really hard. So that whole process, yes, we used an agency. Video Brothers, could not recommend them highly enough. They absolutely killed it. Because to me, I was like, again, I need to be a steward of our money. I need to make sure that we are absolutely partnering with the best out here. So landed on Video Brothers. And then the process itself. So we have a very involved marketing team. I'm not a creative, but I love ideating and having fun with that. We have Lex Winship, who is one of the most brilliant brand and content people and copywriters I've ever met. Brandon Alvarado is our outsourced head of creative. And so the 3 of us really came together in the sense of like, we want to be involved with this. So when we started working with Video Brothers, we said, their usual engagement is a big company comes in, pays them, come up with a commercial idea, write it, script it, shoot it, you're good to go. We're like, no, we want to be involved, especially knowing the nuance of our market and knowing that we had to hit it on this first one. They had to know exactly who we were talking to, how to communicate it, what would be funny in a way that's well received, what would be funny in a way that has people turned off by our brand. And so we worked closely with them on all of that. We did a 2-hour brainstorm session on just like, let's just go every possible idea that's out there. What would land, what wouldn't land. And I think we came up with 25 plus different ideas. And then we narrowed it down to 5. And then we all voted and landed on this Bigfoot concept. And so it was a lot of back and forth. And what I really liked about it was everyone had different strengths. Some people would start pulling an idea and then someone else could flesh it out or add an angle. And so we had this idea of the Bigfoot thing. And then Video Brothers, they knew, okay, we have to pack a punch in 30 seconds. How do we use hooks? How do we add comedy? And that's where they just absolutely blew it out of the water with it. So it's this whole yin and yang approach of everyone working together. And honestly, I think that's why it worked so well, because they were as invested in it as we were. And both sides were happy to be contributing all together with it.
For those that don't know much about connected TV, I mean, my understanding of it, I haven't used this channel directly myself, but there are platforms that allow you to essentially make ad buys on TV through streaming networks with kind of a level of targeting, not exactly as granular as LinkedIn, but you're getting there, and like using it as almost like a display channel to get that message out there. How have you found using that channel? How are you evaluating results and impact?
It's still early days. I'd be lying if I said it was perfect. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't frustrated with it. So there's the good and the bad. A lot of the platforms say, you'll show up on ESPN, you'll show up on Food Network, wherever your audience is watching. But what you find out after you get going is, you're showing up on ESPN when people pick the ESPN app on their smart TV, the Food Network app on their smart TV. But the reality is, I don't have the numbers to back this up. I would probably say 3 out of 4 people are watching through YouTube TV, through Netflix, through Hulu, through Amazon Prime TV, one of those streaming services. And a lot of these providers don't have hooks into those. You have to go directly through Google on YouTube TV. You have to go through Hulu. You have to go through Amazon Prime TV. And so that's where we're at right now, is going and making some of those direct buys, because we're seeing it does work, but not as many people watch those apps as you would think. I don't watch those apps. I haven't seen our commercials yet because I don't watch those apps. I watch YouTube TV if I'm on, or I go straight to Hulu or something. And even in some of those cases, I pay for Hulu to not have commercials. So I wouldn't see them at that instance. So it's also understanding, like, I wouldn't buy Netflix even if I could afford it, because it's something like 80 or 90% have that non-ad supported package. So it doesn't make sense to really put money in there, especially when you're trying to be a steward of your money. So long story short, it's working. I think it can work better as we continue to iterate, but that's the whole point of an experiment, right? You experiment, you validate, you iterate, you validate again, and then you iterate. And that's where we're at right now, is we are at stage 1 validation. We have the first insights. Now we need to iterate and see, like, if we make these changes, will it work in the way that we expect it to or not?
Maybe last question for you, Sam, before we wrap, but I'm just curious, we talked about the bandwagon effect and things becoming stale and discovering what's next. What are you thinking about? What are you keeping an eye on for the next 12 to 24 months?
An interesting one for me. My background is not SEO, but ChatGPT and people going there for answers. Something's going to change here, because right now, if you go in and you say, like, ChatGPT, go ask any questions or whatever, it doesn't provide sources. But right below where you go and type in the query, it says ChatGPT can make mistakes. Consider checking important information. You ask for that information and they say, we won't provide sources. So there's this like give and take that has to happen somewhere in there. And so my eye is, when that change does come, it's going to have to come. Everyone's always saying, cite your source. Like, you can only have so much credibility. That's going to change at some point. And when it does, how do you optimize for that? That's what I'm keeping an eye on.
That's really interesting. I've seen some of those responses come in through like our How Did You Hear About Us, where I work, like people using ChatGPT, people using Gemini to build short lists. So it's definitely happening, and it's the Wild West. It's like SEO in 2000. How do you influence that? How do you get inside? All right, well, Sam, this was super, super interesting. Thank you so much. Wish you the best, and hopefully catch up with you again, see how things are going at Loxo.
Perfect. Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, I want to invite you over to the RevOps FM Substack community, where you can sign up to get rough transcripts, show notes, longer form articles, and other bonus content. Just head over to revops.fm/subscribe to get free access. I'd also love to know what you thought of the episode and to hear suggestions for topics you want to learn about. Feel free to leave a comment on Substack or send me an email at justin@revops.fm. Thanks for listening.